Your reputation's amazing. I will not let you down. You will be very, very impressed, I hope. And I think we'll be speaking a lot, but you'll be looking at me in a year or 2 years. Let's give me a little bit of a time to run things. But a year into office, you'll be saying, wow, I remember that interview. He said he was going to do it, and he did a great job.
That was then candidate Donald Trump praising the right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones in an interview on Jones's InfoWars show as a presidential candidate back in 2015. At the time, Alex Jones was 3 years into his vile attacks on the victims of the 2012 Sandy Hook elementary school shooting, where 26 people, including 20 kids, were shot dead in their classrooms. And he was getting rich doing it. Trump didn't care. Over the next 3 years, Alex Jones's online store would rake in more than $50 million annually, selling body armor and dietary supplements, and his website saw an average of 1.4 million visits daily. That interview was one of candidate Donald Trump's earliest experiments in normalizing and promoting dangerous far-right conspiracy theorists. It served as a dark warning sign of where American politics would eventually and quickly end up. One of our two political parties has been so willing to condone and tolerate fringe conspiracy theories that Trump's followers attempted a coup against the seat of American government, a fact conveniently and regularly forgotten or excused by the party's leaders. But that moment is also a reminder that even the most influential conspiracy theorists can be beaten. Nearly 7 years later, Donald Trump is still the de facto leader of the Republican Party, but Alex Jones is on the brink of ruin, thanks to a series of defamation lawsuits brought by the families of the victims of the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting. Thanks to that, Alex Jones now finds himself liable for millions of dollars in damages. His companies are now trying to declare bankruptcy in a desperate attempt to prevent the fortune he made pushing lies and diet supplements from being seized. In a hearing today in a Texas bankruptcy court, Jones's lawyers made references to free speech, to deplatforming, and even to Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter to try and paint Jones and his businesses as victims of the so-called woke mob. None of that seems to have helped him. The judge overseeing the case said he could make a decision on Alex Jones's bankruptcy ploy as soon as next month. But perhaps there's no better example of just how far Alex Jones has fallen than the fact that he is now begging for help from the dreaded deep state he spent so many years railing against. Last week, Jones formally reached out to the Justice Department to try and get an immunity deal in exchange for cooperating with the department's investigation into January the 6th. Jones was in D.C. on the 6th. Two people familiar with the matter told New York Times reporter Elizabeth Williamson this week that such an immunity deal is unlikely to materialize, leaving Alex Jones out in the cold. No one, not the Justice Department, the bankruptcy courts, or even the former president, appear eager to hand him a lifeline. So what does that mean for Alex Jones? And is his case a model for how to push back against the peddlers of disinformation in the present age? Joining me now is New York Times reporter Elizabeth Williamson, who has been covering Alex Jones's legal troubles. She's also author of the recent book, Sandy Hook, An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Walk me through what Alex Jones's situation is here and how much money he might potentially have to pay out to these Sandy Hook families in the end.
Sure, Mehdi. So I think what's happening here is, the bankruptcy idea is a way to avoid the jury trial. So late last year, Alex Jones was found liable in 4 separate defamation suits filed by the Sandy Hook families. That was because he so obstructed the discovery process in the run-up to trial that the judges found him liable by default. So that means that this year, and it was supposed to begin this week, juries would meet to decide how much he must pay the Sandy Hook families in damages. The bankruptcy filing was filed exactly 1 week before those trials were. This is seen by the Justice Department's bankruptcy court overseer and the Sandy Hook families' lawyers as a ploy to delay these jury trials for damages, which, as you point out, could correctly cost him millions of dollars and potentially his business.
And the other part of this puzzle, of course, the whole DOJ angle. What should we make of Jones's attempts to cooperate with the Biden Justice Department? Does he think that will help him with his bankruptcy case? Does he implicitly accept he has some liability when it comes to January the 6th?
I think these are two separate issues which have one thing in common, and that's that he is seeking protection from the government, which he maligns daily on his show. Yes. I think he sees himself as under threat. And, you know, in the Justice Department investigation into the January 6th insurrection, he has been subpoenaed by the House, and he's reached out to offer a deal for immunity from prosecution to justice in exchange for his testimony. This probably isn't going to fly partly because he may not know much. So that's one issue. And then the separate is, as we discussed, the bankruptcy case in which he's seeking protection from a U.S., from a federal bankruptcy court for his business. It's a very unusual bankruptcy filing in that Alex Jones himself hasn't filed for bankruptcy, just these sort of shell companies. It's an effort to sort of force the Sandy Hook families into a $10 million settlement, which is, saying that he doesn't have the finances to do anything further. But this is someone who's made $500 million in revenues from the time of the Sandy Hook shooting to the present.
Wow. And last quick question on that. He's made a lot of money. Yeah. He has a big reach. Donald Trump went on his show. Matt Gaetz went on his show. Jones got White House credentials at one point, press credentials during the Trump era. He was mainstreamed and normalized, this hate monger, this purveyor of anti-Semitism, this bully of families, by top people in the Republican Party, wasn't he?
Yes. And the issue there is that there is a segment of Alex Jones's audience that was a very valuable constituency for former President Trump. That is the group of people, conspiracy-minded, but deeply distrustful of the government, who put him over the top in the presidential election in 2016.
Yes, they did. New York Times writer Elizabeth Williamson, thank you so much for your time and your analysis tonight. I appreciate it.
Sure thing, Mehdi.